My name is Ashley Jackson, and welcome to Afro Harping, Alice Coltrane. In today's workshop, we'll be investigating how race and gender can be used as frameworks for musical interpretation. And so to understand that, we'll be looking at one piece by Coltrane titled Prema, which in Hinduism means pure love for the divine, which completely melts the heart. Hello everybody, good afternoon or good evening, I think, to some of the UK folks. It's so wonderful to see where everybody's from and what everyone's doing. It's such a wonderful, diverse group. I think we're going to have a lot of fun in this 1 hour. So welcome. I'm going to share a screen with some slides that will help us get through the material for today. So give me a moment. All right, so as I was typing out the date for today's program, I noticed a couple of things. First, that 12121 is a palindrome. So it's the same thing backwards and forwards. And in that way, it's absolutely nothing like music, right? One of the beautiful things about performance is that you can go through the same sequence of notes and harmonies and rhythms and always uncover new layers of meaning. And in that sense, music is really a humbling art form because it just keeps giving back in that way. But when George and I were talking about the date for my workshop, we also realized it was after the inauguration. And as we realized that, we sort of looked at each other and crossed our fingers and hoped for the best. And I don't know about y'all, but when I was watching yesterday, I was really moved by our country's resilience and the determination to move forward in love. It was really beautiful. And on that note, let's talk about some Afro Harping. We'll be focusing on music of Alice Coltrane. As Georgia mentioned, I'm Ashley Jackson, and thank you all once again for being here this afternoon/evening. So today's workshop is about interpretation, both as a listener and as a performer. I'll be thinking about the factors that go into making musical choices, and more specifically, can we consider race and or gender when trying to make sense of those beautiful musical mysteries? And so throughout the workshop, I'll be asking you guys to do some listening together. And so to help us prepare for that, I want us to begin by breathing together. So we'll start with just a short breathing exercise. So wherever you are, if you're sitting or standing, just find a comfortable position. And I'll talk through it first, and then we'll all do it together. So we're going to inhale for a count of 6. We'll hold for a count of 4. And then we'll exhale for a count of 8 on ha. Relax for 4, and then we'll repeat it just a few times. And if you haven't already done so, I have to do it myself. Please mute yourselves. As much as I'd love to hear your ha's, we want this, to be as comfortable for everybody as possible. So wherever you are, find a comfortable position. You can close your eyes if you want, and let's begin. Inhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Relax. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Relax. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Relax. All right, thank you. So today we'll be talking about a piece by Alice Coltrane called Prema, and we'll be listening, discussing, learning, and listening again. So here's a little bit about the piece. Prema in Hinduism means pure love for the divine, which completely melts the heart. And it's from her 1978 album called Transfiguration. And on that album, it's originally for piano and strings. So when I first got the music, I performed it with a string ensemble. But the pandemic has inspired me to play around with the solo version. So that's what I'll be kind of talking from this afternoon. So let's begin with some music. I'm going to play the opening section. And on the recording, it begins with an improv for about a minute. And that's what I've transcribed and arranged and, fumbled around with. And that's where we'll start. So about 1 minute of improvisation. And as you listen, I want you to write down, it could be in the chat if you want, or if you want to keep it to yourself, that's fine. But write down a memorable moment that you hear. And it can either be, however you need to remember, a flurry of high notes or low notes at the end. It's your moment. Hold on to it because we're going to come back to it in just a bit. So here is the opening of Prema. Okay, so as a reminder, hold on to those moments because we're going to come back to it in just a bit. But I want to talk a little bit about Alice Coltrane, who she was and where she came from. So, she grew up in Detroit playing piano. And some of her earliest musical experiences were in the church. And that's where she gained also confidence. And as she got better and her reputation grew, some more churches started inviting her to play with their ensembles, including one such known as the Lemon Gospel Choir. And they were known for that hand clapping, foot stomping, call and response, shouted out style of worship. And it was playing with them that really left an impression on her, and she remembers. I heard music that was just beyond anything I had heard before. I would hear country gospel. I would hear the down home gospel. I would hear the kind of gospel you almost wouldn't need music with. It was flowing from the heart, from the soul. And after a while, there was no music. So let's hear just a little bit of what this sounded like. I found a recording from 1968. So this would have been after Alice Coltrane left Detroit, but you can still get a sense of the kind of musical world that she grew up in and was inspired by. So here's a track called I Got It from a 1968 album of the Lemon Gospel Choir. Okay, so you get the idea, right? Foot, hand clapping, shouting, a lot of call and response right away from the choir. And, you know, when I'm listening to that, I'm brought back to going to my Nana's church. I would go sometimes on Sundays and watch her walk down the aisle as an usher. And sometimes at these services, folks would get so wrapped up, they'd have to be carried up by nurses. And as a young kid, it's kind of scary. But as I got older, I realized that what I could sense that it was actually the music that was helping folks get to this state that was beyond the present. And it was really quite, I just had never seen anything like it before. And so for Alice Coltrane, knowing that that's where she comes from, as she got into other genres of music, jazz, of course, but then later devotional music, I think one thing that we find in common is that she really believes in the power of music to move one to an ecstatic state. And that's something that you hear throughout, you know, as she's dipping in and out of these different genres. And so moving forward, she gets into the jazz bebop scene in Detroit. She's meeting all these different musicians, including, of course, her husband, John Coltrane. But unfortunately, just several years after meeting, he passes away. So this next clip that I want to share with you is a documentary from 1970. And she talks about, you know, music making after John passes away, but also how that is part of who she is, in addition to being a mother of 4, and of course a musician and composer herself. So I now want to share that with you. We'll watch just about 5-6 minutes or so, because I think it gives us a really great sense of who she is and where she's coming from musically.
Home, and I don't like to go too far or travel too far away. Michelle is 10, John is 6, Robbie is 5, and Oran is 3. This year, 3 years since John's death, I've played about 4 or 5 concerts, and really, to me, it's quite a lot of work because I didn't do anything over the past years. So I liked it very much. That concert we played at Glen Cove. One thing that I liked about it was the fact that we played for so many children. This is a part of the music. And Pharoah Sanders, as you know, was one of the members of John's band. I had Reggie Workman and Bill Wood on bass. I had my drummer, Rashid Ali, on drums.
Flames themselves. Let me hear it from Miss Alice Coltrane. You got it, baby.
My concert, I played a selection written by my husband entitled Africa. It's the feeling that I get from playing his music. It's sort of a sharing, you know, with him. It's sort of a being with him on the mental plane or on the spiritual plane. But for me to play his music, I don't feel that I'm an extension, and I don't feel that I can contribute to anything that he did musically. But I just share in the things that he did, all the things that he developed and produced. I share in them. I would like to state at this time that there were days that I know that I spent more than 20 hours in meditation. And there were periods of time that lapsed like beyond 2 or 3 weeks that I know that I was well beyond what the human endurance.
Oh no. Okay, so I didn't quite get to the whole clip, but I think we got a sense she was starting to talk about her being in meditation for really long periods of time. And so from that, and in the beginning of that clip, she talked about sort of sharing in musical space with her husband, not competing, but really just sort of sharing. And so from that, those short clips, we get a sense of, first, obviously, the central place that spirituality holds for her, and that everything else she does comes from that center, including music. And we also get a sense of her, how she views herself as a wife and as a widow, that having that relationship is one that continues even after his passing, and that it's about sort of sharing in space, again, as opposed to competing. that she really has this holistic approach to the various identities that make up who she is. And, you know, as a mother, as someone who's spiritual, and as a wife, and as a musician. And so when I approach her music, I'm then therefore interested in approaching it holistically, as opposed to sort of starting from a beginning and moving to an end. So I want to go back to that opening that I played for you towards the beginning of the presentation. And it began with a sort of very distinct motion between two notes. I see a lot of music people, so I'm going to start to use some musical terms, but I'll just tell you that the beginning is in D, and we have a motion from A to D, or 5 to 1. And if you want to get even fancier with it, we can say that maybe that's a tonic, a dominant moving to a tonic. But the moment I use those words, I attach that meaning to those two notes, there is an assumption that there's a sense of tension and then release, right? But I'm listening to her, I'm watching her speak, I'm watching her play. And with her music, it's less about that forward motion that we expect from a 5 to 1, and more about the space that that interval creates, both, you know, sonically and harmonically. So with that in mind, I'm going to play the opening again. I'll try to play it as similarly as I did the first time. And I want you to look back at your memorable moment. Can you kind of remember what it was, what it sounded like, so that when you get there, see how it feels again. And if it feels the same, if it feels different, take it one step further and ask yourself why. Okay. So as we saw, Alice Coltrane was also a harpist. And so when I was transcribing and arranging this piece, one of the challenges for me was, how do I strike a balance between drawing from my own strengths, but also staying true to her sense of style and musicality. Now in that documentary, right at the beginning, she talked about how being at the harp transported her back to her African roots. And so knowing that about her, I started listening to a lot of kora music. Now kora is a West African harp. It's probably the most familiar to us, It's still used in a lot of solo music, but also contemporary ensembles. And so I was listening to this music to get at some ideas for figurations and textures, so that I could evoke that sense of coming back home. That's so important to her as a harpist and as a composer. So I now want to share with you a little bit of some chord music. And it's a piece called Feature Strings, and it's actually a duet. Catcheen Finch, she is a Welsh harpist. She plays on a Western style instrument, and then the chord player is Sekou Keita. And so it's actually a kind of a dialogue between the two different kinds of harps. And sometimes it's hard to tell which one is which, but right at the very beginning of this track is where we hear the kora. So I want to play just a little bit of that for you so you can get a sense of what I was listening to and what I was trying to get inspired by when working on my own arrangement. So here is just the opening of Future Strings. It's so hard to stop it, but you should look it up. It's a really beautiful tune, very sort of meditative, and it goes on for quite a bit. So that's just a very small sample of the kind of music that I was listening to when I was, again, going through it and trying to put some Ashley into this transcription. So in conclusion, as much as I can, as a performer, I'm studying the composer behind the music, and I'm really interested in everything that makes up that person, and then seeing how far it takes me and what are the connections that I can draw between those, what I'm learning about, but also connections between myself and the material, and then what's happening around me. Because music comes from that person. So when it comes on my stand, I feel responsible to do that kind of work. And I want who the composer is to be a source of inspiration for me, for analysis and performance. Because if I ignore that, then we're whitewashing a very rich lineage of musicians and music making. And so today's workshop was really just about the process that I start to go through when I'm diving into a work as a performer. And so thank you so much for being here. I'm going to sort of wrap up now with a performance of Prema, so you can sit back, enjoy, and then I've got some time for questions and comments afterwards. All right, so thank you again for being here and listening together and watching. Here is my arrangement of Prema. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much again for being here. I have quite a few moments for questions. So if you have any questions, comments, if you want to share that memorable moment and how it felt, from beginning to end, I think that would be really instructive for those who are also tuning in. So ask away.
I don't have any questions in the chat at the moment. So I'll let you know if that changes. But
Okay. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks. I saw that there are a few harpists here, so I'd also be really curious, just from a harpist perspective, if you have any feedback or, sort of thoughts on, harp stuff. That'd be really helpful for me. Not to put the pressure on, but just because I see you guys.
I'm a harpist, and I'm curious when you began playing, because that was incredible. It seems like you've been playing for many years.
Oh, thank you, Christian. Right. Thanks, Christian. So I've been playing for some time. I started when I was 7. So it's been, I'll just say, over 25 years, a little bit longer. So yes, I've been at this instrument for a long time. And so when did you start playing?
I've been playing for about 2 years now. I'm 17, so I'm not super great, but I just love playing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Excellent. Well, keep going. Thanks. I see my friend Becky. Oh my gosh. Hey, girl.
Unmuted. That was beautiful.
Oh, thanks. The clip I showed wasn't like perfect, but she talks more about being a mother too, and I'd be curious to know sort of your or any other mothers out there sort of thoughts about motherhood and music making, and we're in a pandemic too, so just how that's going for everybody. I know it's been challenging, so
I wonder too. I do. If unprompted ask you a question. I'm wondering, how is it for you balancing need for space for creative music making, writing arrangements, thinking about together a project, for the totally integrative experience of spending time raising toddlers?
Yeah. So so Becky's one of my great friends, and she knows sort of my day to day. But without getting too much into the details, I think I reached a point after several months when I realized that I couldn't keep thinking about the music making and the motherhood responsibilities as competing with each other. It was, I can't say what it was, what shifted that for me, but just maybe getting to know more about Alice Coltrane. Honestly, she's been pretty inspiring during this period. And again, just the sense that everything is a part of who she is. And one doesn't take away from the other, but rather inspires the other. So, practically speaking, when I'm...
Well, I was just going to say that in the video that you showed that Alice Coltrane, we talk about how she and her husband, they music making and children, and so I'm wondering what the everyday music diet is at the house.
So in a different part of the video, she says that especially when they were young, she didn't play that much. She didn't play that many concerts because she couldn't. And she also acknowledges that she didn't have to. So she was really grateful for being, comfortable enough that she could focus on her 4 young kids. I mean, that's just astonishing in itself, that she's got 4 kids to raise and they're very close in age. So music seems to be something that she comes in and out of when it suited her. But again, she had that luxury to do that. So there are a few questions in the chat I'm seeing. Okay, Mater, Anne. Thanks, Mater. So she's asking, she says, I've listened to Alice's music when she was younger and she went the classical route. Do I play piano as well? I do. So I grew up playing piano. It was my first instrument, actually. My piano teacher introduced me to the harp. Her how do I put this? Her niece was a harp teacher. And so she's like, well, Ashley, really likes playing piano. They're similar, maybe she could try it. So I played both for about 10 years and then harp took over. Okay, Jean Kaplan. Hi, Jean. Am I playing on a pedal harp? Yes, this is a concert grand with the 7 pedals, the full thing. And Christian, is there a transcription of the piece I just played? Forthcoming. So just a little bit of background. In a few weeks, I'm going to be recording my debut solo album, and this is one of the pieces on it. It includes other transcriptions, some Alice Coltrane, but also some spirituals that I've taken from piano music. And so when it's all said and done, I will also publish the transcription. So look out for that. Thanks.
We also had a question come in. So we had a question come in. Does your approach change if you're approaching a musician's work who wasn't recorded themselves or whose history isn't as well recorded?
That's a great question. For this presentation, I was going to perhaps also present a piece from the classical period by Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and he's a contemporary of Mozart's. Just as I got closer to it, I realized that might be too much to squeeze in this hour. But so for someone like him, who's composing in the 18th century, we don't have nearly as much documentation about who he is. And so I got the idea from my husband. I was practicing Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and he said to me, "You're playing it like Mozart." I got very defensive. But I also went back and did a lot of research. I said, okay, let me find out more about him. And so yes, my approach does also change. I learn, again, as much as I can, and I sort of brought in the case that there isn't as much about the composer, him or herself, I'm then broadening my research to include cultural context and performance practice. So in the case of that, it's a flute and harp sonata in E flat major, I was looking at who the harpist was that was probably written for, what the role of the harp was for nobility because she was a princess, and then what did that mean for the harp part in conjunction with how was Chevalier de Saint-Georges treated in France as a black man. So I was looking for those connections between sort of harp, its place in 18th century court life, and how Chevalier de Saint-Georges would have been in and out of that scene. Great question, thank you. There's a question from Alyssa Rode. Hi, Alyssa. She asks, would you say that improvisation was a form of spiritual practice for Alice Coltrane? Absolutely. I would say most definitely. As you get into like the 80s and later, she's slowly coming out of jazz and she's recording more and more of her devotional practice. So I think even just looking at her output and how it sort of shifts towards the end of her life, again, that the lines were always quite blurred for her in terms of, was it jazz, was it devotional music? It was all for sort of a greater purpose. So I think absolutely it was a form of spiritual practice. And Shirai, hope I'm saying that correctly. Hi, I can see you. Okay, you write, as a Black woman, are there elements of my intersectional identity and experience that make it into music compositions? And are there Black women musicians similar to Alice Coltrane that I would recommend? Yes, oof, that is a question. That's a whole nother class in itself. I'll start with the second piece of that. There are, oh my goodness, I'm working on another piece by Brandy Younger, who's a jazz harpist. She's a friend of mine, and she lives in Harlem as well. So, and she is very much in the style of Alice Coltrane. She's also really heavily influenced by Dorothy Ashby, who was a jazz harpist, again, kind of earlier, recording in the 60s and early 70s. So I'd look at Brandy Younger, who's doing a lot right now, but also, of course, Dorothy Ashby, as in terms of jazz, black jazz female harpists. And then are there elements of my identity that I make it into my music compositions? Sure. You know, at that little gospel clip I played, that's something I could very quickly connect to because I heard it. I saw it. Growing up, going to my grandmother's church. So when I'm working on a piece like this, knowing that that's where Alice Coltrane also came from, I'm thinking about those call and response moments. I'm thinking about, that moment in the service where it seems like things are just repeating over and over again, but something's also building, right? It's like that meditation state is also taking you somewhere else. So wherever I can, it's absolutely inspiring what I do on the instrument because all I can bring is myself, right? so thank you for those questions. It's great. Jamie, do we have anything else?
I don't have anything else waiting in the wings on my end. So I'll go ahead and put out a last call for questions to the room at whole. And I will also use this time to remind everybody that you can save the chat. And to do that, just write down by where you write your questions. You'll see the little box with 3 dots. And if you click that, it brings a drop-down menu. And that's where you can hit save chat. And I will also use this time to just say thank you so much to Dr. Ashley Jackson. This has been such a wonderful class. It's been so wonderful to learn about this and to listen to you play the harp so beautifully. And so we just really, really appreciate your time and your talent and all the information that you've given us. And I'm also going to take this time to drop our links in the chat one more time where people can go to learn about our organization and future classes that we have and where people can go to donate and follow us on social media. And I see we have another question. So that's great.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. So Alexander Greenberg. Hi, Alexander. Oh, there you are. So he asked, can I speak quickly to the process of adapting idioms from something like a traditional harp to the more Western harp? Yeah, so Alexander, there were a couple of layers of translation, I guess, involved in this because the original track was for piano. So I had to deal with that. And then there was, again, right, those me being interested in core music and sort of sounds of African instruments. So it was kind of like I took as much of the original as I could from the piano part, made whatever didn't work, I sort of took it out and made it harp friendly, at least I could get from beginning to end. And then with the kora stuff, whatever didn't work, but if I wanted to maintain something similar, I would insert that. So it was really kind of like a layered approach, right? Like take as much as I can, whatever doesn't work, put something else in. And I've been with this piece for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. And especially since the pandemic, it's gone through a lot of changes. Because now I'm just like, it's just me and the instrument, and I'm always playing around with stuff and adding sort of new layers. So that's music, that's what we do. Thanks for your question. And Tim, he's looking forward to the transcription. Thank you. He writes, I think a lot about the limitations of notation, but that puts responsibility on the player to learn about the composer and the context that I've been talking about. So do I have thoughts on sharing music orally versus notation, when translating from idioms that don't traditionally use notation? Excellent question. I'm classically trained 100%. So this was a real challenge for me. This was a stretch because I was relying very much on my ear and not what was on the page. And I think a lot opens up when you don't look, right? You know, I'm looking at you guys, your beautiful faces, but I'm focused on that as opposed to just the audio. So the moment you put something on paper, in some ways you lose something. So in my process with this, I would, you know, we share music however we need to share it, right? If people need to look at it on paper, then that's why I want to publish the transcription so that classically trained harpists can have access to this kind of music. But I would recommend that if you're transcribing and if you're arranging from an idiom that does not traditionally use notation, is to rely on your ear as much as you can. And Lynette is a fellow New York harpist. Great! Hey, Lynette. Okay.
And I wanted to share, just earlier in the class, we had somebody ask if you'd be willing to share those YouTube links if people wanted to revisit those performances.
Sure, I can send them to you, Jamie, and then in an email, and they can go out to the audience. Okay, great. Perfect. So it's 1:57. I think George has got to call it too. Maybe some people need to get a lunch or a dinner. So again, you know, just thank you so much. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Jamie and Maestra, for all your support of this kind of work. They've got a great roster and series of workshops, so do check that out. And thank you all again for being here, for sharing, for listening together. I wish you all to stay healthy and safe and uplifted. So thanks again, and do stay in touch.
And one more big thank you to our instructor, Dr. Ashley Jackson, for a wonderful, wonderful class. And thank you, everybody, for being here. We hope to see you at future Maestra workshops, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. Take care.